All right. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for another another event of AngelNV. Tonight, Logan Brown is going to talk to us about Pitch Decks 101. Not Pitch Decks 201 or Pitch Decks 401, but Pitch Decks 101. So this presentation is designed for that most basic of pitches, the 10-minute pitch, which is, of course, designed to get you onto the next pitch, which may be covered in session 201 or 301. So tonight we're going to talk about Pitch Decks 101. But before we do, I want to make a couple of announcements, thank our sponsors, and then we'll get right to it. So I'm going to share a screen and we will begin shortly. So what you see up there on the screen right now is a couple of QR codes and some links. If you do want to apply for funding, AngelNV Seed Fund invests $200,000. That investment will be made, will be announced on April 30th after about 6 or 7 weeks of screening and investing and due diligence, et cetera. So if you are looking for a $200,000 investment, either remember that really long and ugly URL on Gus to go and apply, or just scan the QR code and you can begin the application there. If you get confused, go to angelnv.com and there's links to all of this stuff on angelnv.com. For StartUpNV, the StartUpNV Accelerator, which invests a minimum of $50,000 in companies that pitch and get in. You can apply at startupnv.org/booking or just scan that QR code and get in. On the AngelNV side, there is a $29 fee to our nonprofit donation to apply. If that's a hardship, just contact us by email and we'll waive it. So I want to say thanks to our sponsor, first the Brex card. If you are a founder and you are looking for corporate credit, apply to that URL that you see there, brex.com/startupnv. You can apply there. Assuming you get approved, you'll get a $500 gift in your corporate card account, courtesy of StartUpNV and Brex. Second sponsor is City of Las Vegas. They have been just troopers for us, providing a space and a little bit of cash to put on this event. So thanks to the City of Las Vegas. And then last, but certainly not least, Glassboard Technology. Glassboard provides all of our back office services so that we can make the investments that we make, both for FundNV and for AngelNV. So if you're an investor and you like to do special purpose vehicles and you want to have an easy way to organize your investors and all your back office work, I suggest you reach out to Glassboard Technology. They've been good for us, not only as a sponsor, but just as our back office for all of the investing that we do. A little bit about StartUpNV. We're an incubator and accelerator program for the state of Nevada. We cover the process from idea all the way through scaling. So for companies that are kind of in the idea phase before they've created their MVP or their version 1, we have an incubator. We call it GrowNV, and it covers the 4 or the 3.5 red circles that you see on the left-hand side of this slide in the feasibility stage, up to the point where you've actually created the very first version of whatever it is you're going to do, whether that's a software product, a physical product, or a service of some kind. You can see some ideas of sort of optimally how long each of those phases should take to get to the point where you have an initial product that you can begin to start selling in the market. And that's the point at which you become eligible for the accelerator program that comes with the $50,000 in funding. So if you are at that stage or you're getting close to that stage, I suggest that you use that QR code that I showed a minute ago, and I'm going to show again, to apply to the accelerator program, where you get the investment along with a lot of mentoring and subject matter expertise to get you to the point where you can raise a seed round, where you're actually starting to generate revenue and starting to scale your company. So check out those programs at GrowNV and StartUpNV. You can reach them all via our website at startupnv.org. And you want to ask, does it work? Does it actually work? Well, here's a few companies that are actually actively in the program right now. Surgistream, Stayfire, Naraka, Turbine, and Stream It Now, also known as Express Tickets, all have gone through that process, along with 727 other companies who have pitched to us, 52 of whom who have come through the accelerator program. 28 of those have been funded and have raised a total of $70 million. So it does work. There are lots of companies out there. These 5 that you see, along with 23 others that have come through the program and gotten funding. And once again, really quickly, if you do want to pitch for either the $200,000 investment that comes with through the AngelNV seed fund program or the StartUpNV accelerator program, either take a picture of this slide and go through the URL, or just scan those QR codes and you'll be able to apply for the funding. So thanks again, everybody, for coming on out. I'm going to turn it over quickly here to Logan Brown, who's going to talk to us about Pitch Decks 101, the easiest pathway to a great 10-minute pitch. So over to you, Logan. And as you guys do have questions, please drop them in the chat. Maggie's going to be screening through the questions and asking them at appropriate times, either throughout the presentation or at the end. But if you do have questions as Logan's going on here, just drop them in the chat and we will get to all of them. So again, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. And Logan, over to you. Take it away, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Everyone, Jeff, Matt, can you confirm that I'm being heard on that? So you can just give a thumbs up if you guys can hear me okay. All right, we're good to go. Well, everyone, thank you guys for tuning in both in person and online. Happy to have you. And today we're going to be going over exactly what Jeff said, Pitch Decks 101, how to create an effective pitch off the bat. And, there's some things we need to talk about first, kind of set the expectations of this is, all pitch decks from pitch to pitch will be 2 main things you need to keep in mind. One, they're not all going to be the same. Some will have different constraints, they'll have a different audience, and they will have different goals, different companies, obviously. So they'll all vary a little bit from pitch to pitch, but there are some key core things that generally early stage investors and investors in general want to see, that we have realized and executed on those patterns over the years. So that's what we're going to talk about today is the core pitch deck, the Pitch Decks 101, what you need to think about to create that first compelling pitch to get to the next meeting. And also something to consider with pitch decks is that it's a living document. Everyone, we have too many founders have this core pitch deck that doesn't really change. They may update a few key figures. Many things that you guys need to keep in mind is that your pitch deck you'll have many iterations of it. You'll have 10 plus iterations on it. You'll have 1 minute, 3 minute, 10 minute. And we addressed this a little bit in our pitch deconstruction days we've had in the previous weeks. But your deck will be a living document. You'll be constantly updating it. You'll be altering it depending upon the circumstance, depending on the audience, depending on the investor. So keep that in mind that your pitch deck is not a static document that goes doubly for your initial pitch deck. So with that being said, we'll dive in a little bit to Pitch Decks 101. So what is the purpose of the pitch deck? There's a big misconception that the purpose of the pitch deck is to get capital, to raise funding. And that may be only true down the line, but the true purpose of the pitch deck is to get to your next meeting, to get in and talk more in depth with potential investors about your concept. So you're not in this initial meeting presenting the entire book on your concept, your entire business model on the concept, your entire revenue, your pro forma, your revenue, your financial models, etc. What you're presenting is the story and the market opportunity that is waiting for them if they want to choose to invest. Right? So with that same note in mind, I want to go over really quickly, I won't spend too much time on the difference between a pitch deck and a deliverable. So a pitch deck is simple, it's to the point. It's short, 7 to 15 minutes. It's when you introduce the concept and you sell the concept to an investor. There's more speaking and there's less in text. You don't want to bog down your pitch deck. And it's usually 6 to 12 slides, all right? A deliverable is not for the first pitch. It's for the follow-up meeting, all right? It has more details, more information, more references, and it's a backup. It's a detailed backup for you to reference in a follow-on meeting or a follow-on some sort of get-together. It's not the pitch deck, not the initial pitch deck anyway. So keep that in mind as you guys are starting to structure your pitch decks and getting onto your first pitch opportunities. So a little bit on the basics, right? Content, know your audience. This is kind of important on two spheres. One, it will show through, and we have, if you are engaging and finding out who the investor group that you're pitching to is, who the investor is. We had already talked about, I think Danielle from a number of weeks ago talked about, she would always research who her investor group is, finding out what they've invested in, what they do, what their interests are. And if you, the deck itself, the deck content doesn't necessarily need a pivot for that, but how you're practically applying the content to their pitch expertise, to their investment expertise, that will show through and is not wasted on investors to a limit, for sure. Secondly, knowing your audience is pretty important when you don't know if you're presenting to a crowd of accredited versus non-accredited versus just a regular crowd, a mixed crowd, if you will. So if you're presenting to a group that you know are all accredited investors, have investing capability, you can delve a lot more into the financials and terms of your raise. What are you raising at what terms? What are the additional really nitty-gritty and sensitive items to address for that raise? If you're pitching to a mixed crowd, try to keep it more high level. You're raising this much for generally these items, all right? So keep that in mind as you're going through, and we can talk more about that at the Q&A. Now, 6 to 8 topics. We're keeping this real, again. This is real. It's real straight to the point. It's streamlined, right? And tell the story. You're not getting bogged down in really like the depth of the revenue models, the business model, the market research. You're telling the story of the problem, the solution, what is the opportunity for the investor to gain. All right, style, one idea per slide. All right, keep it. We want to, again, keep this streamlined and simplified. Large font. Investors don't tend to be spring chickens, and they want to be able to see right off the bat what you are addressing. What is the item that you're going over in this slide? Right? A few words. Use your presentation skills to convey the message. There's a general adage that if you are reading, you're not listening. So you want your investors to be listening, and your deck should be a structured support for the pitch itself, right? So keep that in mind as you're going through this. Secondly, all right, sorry, content. These are the items that should be in your deck, your pitch deck 101. These are the problem and the pain point. What are you going to be addressing? What is the missing opportunity or the problem for the consumer? Your solution. This really is your meat and bones. This is where you are talking about what you are doing that's addressing this pain problem, this pain point. Market opportunity. What is the implied opportunity for a market cap for this startup? Business model. How are you making money? Competition. Who out there is going to be, who are you going toe to toe with to provide this service or this solution to the market? Traction. We'll talk about this as well. Like how have you done? What are your revenue? What are your customer acquisition metrics? How are you doing? How are you growing? What are the metrics you have to support that? Team. Who are you and who are your team and how are they qualified to execute this venture? And then ask, what resources are you seeking, capital and otherwise, and what are the terms or the allocations for those? So we go to this problem. Again, less is more. We have way too many entrepreneurs that come in and have this very convoluted multi-stage problem they want to address. Really focus on the core pain point and simplify and streamline and nail it down to that core, really painful point or really prevalent market opportunity, all right? Less is more. Focus on the main things. Spend only 1 minute on this, all right? You guys, we're going to take this in the context of a 10-minute pitch, right? If you go, you will be in many circumstances where you will have a timed pitch and no more, and they will be very hardlined on that. So be prepared. This is a 10-minute pitch. You should really only be spending about that much time on any pitch, and you should be prepared for about 1 minute or less on the problem itself. Again, simplicity and streamlining. Use pictures as demonstrations. Pictures are really good as long as they're structured correctly at conveying a pain point with all of its nuances, if you will. So that being said, we're going to go through these. We're going to talk about each of these sections. We're going to go over some good, okay, and bad examples. Excuse me, but in the opposite order, we'll go over bad examples first, leading into great examples. So the problem, this is an example of a not so great problem slide. There's too much going on. As we can see, there are formatting errors, so there's images bleeding into words. There's too much. I have to go through this. Believe it or not, there's actually a company with really great technology in the genomics section. We remade this to be a little bit more convincing and a little bit more streamlined and to the point. 1 in 2 people will get cancer. Would you like to know? Would you like to know in advance? Now that's compelling, is it not? There's a problem here, and you're outweighing the problem and all the nuances that come with it versus health, cancer. Would I like to know? Preventative medicine, etc. So this is a compelling problem slide. Right? This is a good use of imagery. It's a little bit structured, it's a little humoristic, if you will. But this company actually created a cooling donut for men to put in their seats to cool their regions. We put this in here. It is amusing, but it is effective use of imagery to say, here's the problem. Overheating is a real problem. So it's a good example to draw on for the use of imagery. Doesn't necessarily need to be the way that you present yours. But again, what are the images that you can use? There's streamlined sentences you can use to convey the problem really quickly, and the core problem, not ancillary problems. All right, solution. How are you solving the problem? This is really where you're going to spend more time on, up to 2 minutes in the pitch, a regular 10-minute pitch. This is, the meat and potatoes of what you're trying to convey, your solution. So use pictures if you have them. Do not demo. Demo is for in-room after you're at your second meeting. Remember, this pitch is to get to another meeting. A demo may be appropriate for that second meeting. A demo does a number of things. It sucks up time. It could fail on you. And a lot of times your demo is a beta or an alpha, and it's not quite to par of what you want to present to your investors and what your vision is. So don't use the demo to suck up your time. It draws away from what you are trying to do, all right? Screenshots, we don't advise screenshots or videos. There's a number of reasons. Screenshots tend to be really compact, and if they fit on a slide, they don't command you very well. They don't show exactly what you're doing. It's better that you effectively describe what you're doing, right? And videos tend to go awry. They tend to not play when they're meant to. They tend to be buggy when they need to. This is just our experience of seeing these companies with pitch decks 101. Again, this is 101. In 102 and 301, you start to get into a little bit more nuance of this. But it's recommended for your first pitch deck, you focus on nailing down that core problem, your solution, and saying what you do effectively that's different and competitive and effective. All right, tell us how the adage in the industry is it has to be 10 times better and 30% cheaper. So we need to see how you need to tell us how this is 10 times better than what is currently in the industry, right? Again, I'm sure we might have some questions down the line, but we're going to go to this. This is a bad example of a solution slide. You guys can see there's a snapshot of the app itself. It looks like texting. I don't get any value of seeing this. I don't know what this is trying to convey. There's too much information here. I have to swim through all this to find out exactly what they're doing. There's too many acronyms. There's these acronyms that are undefined. I have no idea what they're trying to represent here. Caregivers is one word. They misspelled that 3 times, and it's their industry. There's just a number of things kind of wrong with this already, right? Remember, simplify and streamline. Here's a great example. This is HighBear. It's actually a company we've invested in. They're very successful at this point, but they have done a great job on a number of ends. One, there is a certain, broken down stylistic component that's effective and it's appealing to the eye. And they have done a great job of blowing up these images and saying, this is what we are, this is what we do, this is the product, without having a ton of words going on here. you can tell that this slide would rely on me as the presenter or me as the founder and entrepreneur saying, this is what we do, and this is how it happens. And it goes along as a support for my pitch, not this, not this multi-page item about what it is, what the specifications are on it, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a really good example of, and they have at the top here, all-day adventure flask. Like, 1 sentence, 2, 3 words that or 4 words that would say what exactly this is. So this is really a good example of an effective solution slide. All right, market. So if you're prepped, spend about a minute on this, all right? Now, Maggie already drew attention to a number of things about the TAM SAM song a couple of weeks ago. How to effectively gauge your markets, how to go about finding resources, versus whether it's market research or getting your calculated bottom-up obtainable market. So we won't go too much into this, but we want to talk about what you want to show in that deck. So create a bottom-up attainable market. You need to have some sort of derived calculation that says that you put some thought in this and it's convincing and supported about how much of a market, a serviceable, obtainable market you could address. Remember, TAM SAM songs are highly favored by early stage investors, right? Even late stage investors, essentially. It's a very effective and simple way to communicate what it and imply what the market opportunity is, right? So a couple of examples, no, we will get 0.1% of the US market. That's arbitrary, right? And not only is it arbitrary, but it's not put in dollars. Put your market in dollars. Down the line, and even sometimes in more nuanced decks, you can talk about how many users are in the market if it's appropriate. But what they're worried about, investors are interested in, is not the users, but the dollar value of said users or consumers. So put your market in dollars. It's one of the easiest mistakes to make is entrepreneurs will focus on how many people are using it. They won't tell us the amount. Make the calculation, put it in dollars. What is the implied market opportunity for your investors should they enter this venture, right? Major markets, not ancillary. We have entrepreneurs coming, they have like 3 to 5 different ancillary markets that they're going after. And one of the key downfalls of some ventures is that they are focused way too much on too many markets. Streamline and execute order on the main market itself and draw focus to that. That's the main core market, okay? Now, this is an example of a bad market slide. There's too much going on here. Sure, it's bright green and bright red. I get the 10,000 baby boomers per day turning 65, 52% in long-term care. I don't know what LTPAC beds mean, but there's just been no derivation of that. And then this slide, I have no idea what's going on with this this graph here, right? We reworked this to be a little bit more effective. Right here, we still get the 10,000 baby boomers are turning 65 every day. 52% will need long-term care, and it's simplified with the beds. What you'll notice is that this has an issue of it not being in dollars. There's no dollar value here. I have no idea. Okay, well, and also it's not converted to a TAM SAM, so I have no idea how many of these beds the founder wants to accomplish, and I also don't know the dollar value. So it still needs a little bit of work. But if you had an ancillary slide that accompanied this was used to emphasize the point that the market is huge and growing, that's fine. But you need to have this accompanied with information about the dollar value of the market and how much you foreseeably and realistically can capture in 3 to 5 years, all right? This is a great example of a market slide. We see this, the normal TAM SAM song, which is highly favored by investors. It's simple, it's effective. We see that Attainable, okay, they have $45 million attainable market. That's not bad. What investors will ask is, how did you arrive at that? Do not put how you arrived at that on the deck. You will talk about how you arrived at that. You can present on how you arrived at that. But the great thing about this is that it's also the stylistic component is they have a rocket kind of implicitly showing that they have rapidly growing rocket-like growth. And also they talk about on the here on the side, they break down what the numbers, I said earlier, numbers are fine, but we need the dollar value. But they break down the numbers component of their market alongside the dollar value. So this is a great slide that kind of hits everything on the, hits everything well, right? So this is a good example here. Business model. How exactly are you making money, right? What are you selling? How are you selling? How are you reaching, your target market? What are your channels essentially? And spend about 1.5 minutes on this. This is a topic that if you nail everything, you're going to still get technical questions on this component because there's a lot of different ways that a market can go through, and even the nature of a startup is a temporary business model to find something sustainable. So make sure that you are clearly communicating what your current model is, how you are selling your end product, and how are you making money, right? So we're gonna go through a couple of examples here. This is a terrible example. I get almost nothing from this. I know that I can assume from this, and if I recall correctly, they were in the ticketing space or the convention lending space, but this is too vague. There's nothing taking place here that gives me any value of, wow, how are they making money? Okay, these may be their customers, to revenue streams, and I can look down here and see the bottom says a portion of the tickets are sales from conventions. We're selling targeted advertising, but that's too vague. There's not enough going on here. They don't have a pricing structure. There's not enough information for me here to make an informed decision as an investor, or to really even be interested in it. Now this is terrible for another reason. There's too much information here. Again, streamline, simplify, core components. We're looking at this, and I have to swim through all these bullets and all these models to find finally down here in the fourth bullet. Okay, so they're charging subscription fees of $2.99 to $16.99. Okay, to who? And I have to swim through here again to find that out. But this is terrible for a different reason. There's too much information here. You're bogged down. Again, if investors are reading, they are not listening. So this needs to be restructured and built down to show what are the key components? What do I need to know? I don't need to know ancillary information. I don't need to know about existing apps. I don't need to know about current app users. This is all ancillarily related actually to the market, not the business model, right? This is not bad. How it's structured to the eye, I have to look at it for a minute. But what it basically says is that we're doing wholesale and retail. We're doing $4.29 for a large and $5.99 for wholesale. And we're doing $5.99 large for retail. And we see our cost to manufacture, which is great. So overall, this breaks it down fine. We see pretty concretely like what's going on. There might be some issues with the structuring of it because I don't know exactly what's going on over here on the side. So small versus a bench, small versus bench. Okay, this is for wholesale and retail. There could have been some structuring there to make it a little bit clearer. But overall, I kind of get that. Okay, they're charging $4.29 for a large wholesale, $5.99 for that, and I see what it costs to produce the packaged good. Right? This is a great example. Really streamlined, really straightforward. It looks like from this, we know that they are going after individuals and businesses. For individuals, they're charging $19 a year. These are what they're going to get with those. For our businesses, we see they're charging $29 to $1 million a year, depending on the size of the consumer. And we see kind of what they're getting. All right. So this is an okay example. It's a pretty solid example of what a business or revenue model, whatever you want to present, looks like. I clearly, as an investor, know right off the bat, okay, you're going after a consumer model, but also after an enterprise model. This is what you're charging. And I can dive into deeper questions from here instead of just being confused. Right? Competition. This is a big one that a lot of really new entrepreneurs make. Don't tell me there is not. That's kind of anecdotally, we have had investors in the middle of a pitch, and after the pitch in the Q&A, after being told there weren't competition, or the competition wasn't listening, they're just like Googling it and then calling the entrepreneur out about their competition during pitch or after the pitch. And people do that. So you should be very well aware of who your competitors are and who your potential competitors are. I mean, even Henry Ford, when he created the Model T, the first conventionally produced automobile, said that his competition was the horse and buggy. It was what people were already using if they weren't going to use his product, right? So keep that in mind as you're talking about your competition. Be really thorough in your research, then use the biggest competitor, the biggest potential competitor to compare again, when you make your competitive analysis, okay? Do a wrap up. What are your features versus their features? And we'll show some good examples and some bad examples of that here in a minute. You're trying to, in this section, say, what are our competitors doing, and what is our competitive edge against them? What are we doing that is value additive that they are not? Why should people choose us over the competitor? All right? That's what you need to be keeping in mind as you show these slides. If you're doing a price comparison, this is another thing that investors will check on as well mid-pitch, or in the Q&A. Be regularly, again, and it speaks to having an organic document. You are updating your pitch deck regularly. You should be checking the prices of your competitors every time you pitch. You want to make sure that your pricing is accurate on this, because it's really embarrassing if you're totally off. All right? Particularly if they're pricing your competitors way better than yours all of a sudden for whatever reason. Spend about a minute on this. All right, don't have to get too bogged down, but you'll spend a good chunk, a good minute on this. So here's a bad example. Who is our competition? Professional sports such as the NBA and NHL, college sports leagues, NCAA divisions. This was actually they had an interesting concept. They had a concept where they were going to try and create a samurai, a collegiate and professional samurai fighting league, which is a neat idea. And they had the wherewithal to think, well, we know we'll need to pull eyes and market value from existing professional and arena sports and collegiate sports. But nothing in this conveys to me what they're going to do differently that would say, well, how will you draw eyes and attention from them? What are you doing differently? At minimum, they could have said, well, we're going to be a combat sport. But they didn't list any kind of they didn't list a number of relevant fighting sports in this. So this is something that I'm unconvinced, if I'm an investor looking at this, that they are doing something that is competitive. I have no idea what to compare them to. So it's just kind of a poor example. There's a great example. Again, this is high bear. So this is a good example, both stylistically and on its effectiveness of what the competitive edge is, how they rack up against their competitors. So you guys can see on the top row, they have their competitors, and on the side, they have the competitive components. And at the very bottom, they have the pricing, right? And you notice that, they have structured this such that you can see clearly how they rack up against competitors. But not only that, there are some stylistic components. Now, it's never encouraged to mislead, but if you can effectively convey your competitive edge in your message, you absolutely should. Something you should look at here is they have, they made the thumbs up, they're darkened in versus the axes, they're kind of grayed out. And they've made this on a gradient that shows what they are competitive at versus their competitors. And the bottom have the price that they update regularly. All in all, and it's clean, there's not too much bogging this down, right? The overall is a great example of a competitive matrix, or rack up, as many people call it. This is a pretty solid example. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of different competitors in this. They might, once you start getting beyond 5 or 6 competitors, it gets a little bit crowded on the slides. So you should really focus on the main 4 competitors itself and what your competitive edge is. But overall, this is another great example, again, with the price point, which you should regularly update, of a good competitive matrix or a good rack up. Traction. So you should only include this if you have revenue or growth of some nature, something that you can show incrementally has grown over time. You can provide the metrics or the numbers to support that, right? You want to show growth month over month or year over year if appropriate. And you want to tell us about your CAC or LTV. And those are topics kind of for another time. I encourage you to research those. We can have a conversation on those as well. Your CAC is your customer acquisition costs. How much does it cost you to get a customer? And there are various ways you can calculate that versus with your marketing channels, through consultants, a number of other things. How much money does it cost you to get a customer? And then 2, your LTV, your lifetime value. How much is each customer worth to you? And if you've got a good concept, hopefully your LTV will be, your long-term value will be much higher than your cost to acquire said customer. You also want to talk about your customer retention or your churn rate. How many of your customers are repeat customers? You know, if you have a concept that has most of them are repeat customers or returning customers, that's a significant value add to your pitch deck to investors. It says that people like your product and they keep coming back. Right? And then we're going to take a detour here for just a minute to talk about traction versus milestones. They're often mixed or they're kind of used interchangeably. Traction refers to some sort of growth component, usually revenue, right? You can be growth in customers, which translates to revenue as well. It can be other growth factors. You're showing revenue or growth in the company. You're talking about that and what the metrics are and such as that. Milestones or key accomplishments, you might call, are things that you have done that are key to the endeavor, which are still valuable to have. Did you get a patent? Did you launch an MVP? Did you raise your first round? Did you score your first channel partner, et cetera, et cetera? But they're not traction. So know that key difference. They're both valuable to its pitch deck. You can include them both. You can combine them in some instances, but know the difference, right? So here is an example of a poor traction slide. There's too much going on here. Again, streamline and make it effective and simplify. They've got you know, the redundant information. They got it in the graph itself, and they also have it in the slide. I have to I have to squint at this legend to find out, okay, what exactly is the slide representing on the graph itself. They also say that there are $16.5 million of profit first year from Nevada alone, not nationwide market, not the worldwide market. That calls into question. So when you have a traction like this, you really have to, you know, be realistic. It comes down to the same thing as TAM Samsung, your market size. Be realistic with where you think you can effectively accomplish within a 3 to 5 year time frame, or even in this case, a 1 year time frame, and make it more streamlined. If there's too much going on, if we need really go what's going on here. This harkens back to what I talked about traction versus, you know, milestones. So they named this traction, but this is actually a milestones slide. It's valuable information. Great, major accounts. They're at Walmart and they're Ace. This is actually a company that we've had pitch, and they have a neat concept. You got a consumer product with a neat concept. They have distribution partner. They have an MVP. They have a patent. They have a trademark. They've gotten their sales team in place. This is valuable information. As an investor, I don't mind seeing this. However, it's not traction. I'm not seeing, well, okay, this doesn't convey to me revenue or sales growth or user growth, all right? So know that key difference. If you're gonna do traction, think of growth, think of revenue. What are the performance, what are the metrics that you're using to show revenue or user growth, okay? Here's a pretty solid example of a traction slide. So we know, we can see these key metrics right here. So 19 customers served this year, 1,900 plus. 80% are returning purchasers within 3 months. That's great. And you can see the growth here. One thing that's not shown here, but the person who presented this company actually did so in their presentations. They're a great company, great founder, and very good stage presence. They're very good at presenting their concept. They talked about the growth numbers here. So they're not listed in this slide right now, but they were talked about, they were addressed. If you do not explicitly say, we did this numbers, and these are the growths that we had, include them in the slide. All right, that'd be the only recommendation I have for this one, is put the numbers at the base of the slide. So you see that it's not just an arbitrary growth projection, there's numbers attached to this for the quarter-on-quarter growth, okay? Team, all right. It's really hard to do more than 4 people on a team. A lot of times entrepreneurs are really inclined to include their advisors. That's okay, but you really should try to keep it focused on your core 4 team members, all right? Or less than 4. If you are the team, who is the team to effectively execute this concept, all right? Show picks. It is understated how much investors like to put a name to a face to people that they are going to see in this company. It's highly recommended that you include your professional headshot or whatever it might be to show who you are in this slide, right? Who is your team and why are they qualified? You should have no more than 2, 3, 4 bullet points on your per person about who they are, why what skill sets they have, and how they're pertinent to effective execution of this concept, and what their previous experience might be, whether it's project-based or company-based. And you should, as best you can, try and include some logos of pertinent and well-named companies or projects you've been involved in that would lend credence to what you're saying your skill set is. You know, the stereotypical example is if you have a co-founder, technical co-founder that's worked at Google or Apple or what have you, and they have that experience working with those, pretty prestigious groups, bringing those skill sets into that company. Again, why is your team the team to execute this concept, right? Spend less than 30 seconds on this. If you have a founder or you are the founder or you have a team that's exited before, that's done something very pertinently successful in this field, it's up to you whether you want to spend some more time on that, drawing attention to the fact that you've been there and done that in a similar field that you've executed the concept before. That's the only time where it would lend to your credit to spend a little bit more time on the founders and their skill sets. All right. You will get questions on this. If the investors have questions, they will ring back and ask you about your team a little bit more. Okay. So, some examples. One thing is that tried as we might, we could not get a picture. Tried as we might, we could not get a background. Like the founders say, what were they effective at? What were their key accomplishments to make them think about this? And it's just a little bit crowded. And I could see, okay, so they have the team, they have a business model, they include some things in here, including their pay, the price of the subscriptions, but that should be in the business model, not in the team slide. I don't get anything from here about the team themselves. But they named their developers who were their partners, but they were not co-founders. So they just said, everything's developed out of house, and here's their information, but here's nothing on us as the founding and the executing team. Which leads me as the investor to think, well, I know nothing about this team. Why would they've not convinced me that they're the team to execute this concept. All right. So this slide's lacking quite a bit. This one's okay, it's getting better. So we have 2 founders, we have the pictures, we see what they are. There's a little bit too much to swim through here. Too much in here. First line is, PhD electrical and computer engineering, great. I was working at the bottom, I see Apple and Philips. I see on the other hand, she's worked in business management, worked in the millions of dollars of revenue generated company. Sure, but I have to swim through that a little bit before I get anything. Bullet point this out, simplify this out. And also lend some credence to the companies you've worked for if they're pertinent. They could have included some logos or some titles of companies they worked for, they've done this work at. What is this multi-million-dollar company that she generated revenue for? That, she can just arbitrarily say that, but if she says who it was, that lends more credence to it. You also might notice that they didn't include their last names. Now, that might be because they had conflicts with work. They maybe didn't want their professional lives to find out they were working on a side project. That's something that some founders are going to have to work around. But this is not as effectively delivered as it could be. Right? So this is an example of a pretty solid team slide. You've got the 2 main founders, their key expertise. You see where they are, you see their key expertise down here. I can see he's worked for Caterpillar and he's worked for Zappos. Those are 2 pretty prestigious companies. Caterpillar is a huge company. Zappos is a startup, was a startup originally. They have a startup culture. So I understand that, hey, they've got the expertise within those 2 areas to effectively execute on this concept. One thing I would like to see on this is that, they have a little enough information here that I could read through it quickly and see, but it would have been nice maybe to put, a Caterpillar logo here and a Zappos logo there. So I see immediately, it's like, oh, this guy's worked for Caterpillar, this guy's worked for Zappos in whatever position. They have some skill sets they brought over, hopefully from those, from that experience that would be useful in executing their venture now. So, but overall, it was pretty solid. We see their faces, they're smiling. We know who these founders are, essentially. All right, you're asked, Again, I'll bring that, loop this back to when I first started. Know your audience. So if you have a mixed audience, probably just keep it high level, keep it, we're raising this much money. Essentially, maybe you can tell them where it's going to go to. There are SEC laws that govern solicitations in pitch decks. So you can't say for what the terms are, you can't be necessarily asking for money when you're pitching to a mixed crowd or a crowd that's going to be mostly non-accredited investors. If you know that your group is mostly not accredited, accredited investors, you can talk about the deal terms. What's the structure of the investment, what are the rates, and more sensitive materials about the capital allocation itself, and so on and so forth. So keep that in mind when you guys are pitching, and if you don't know exactly what the audience is. List your use of funds. This is the biggest thing. People say, we need this much money for everything. Well, investors are going to be really wary of where that money is going. So have a breakdown of where your capital allocation is. How much is going to salaries, to development, to marketing, to overhead, etc. Now, really important, we don't need to see a financial statement. Again, we don't need to see a financial statement. What we need to see is a general breakdown of where you are going to be allocating that money, right? If they're all accredited investors, you can consider putting the ask first. Experienced investors will know implicitly from what's in your ask and where you're allocating the capital to kind of understand what stage of a company you're at, what you're going to need help with, and what are the things, the challenges and obstacles you guys are probably facing now. So it's not a bad idea. You can definitely if you put that first, you introduce yourselves. We're such and such and such and such company. We're raising this much capital with these terms. Here's where we're going to talk about this start, and you can go into your pitch from there. All right. Spend less than 30 seconds. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Again, when pitching, investors will come back to the questions they have. Right. So, but your pitch should be pretty streamlined. This is a terrible example of a ask. Couple of things. I have to swim through all of this to find out here at the very bottom. Okay, they want $400,000, and I have to read more to think. Okay, they're going to cover all expenses for initial startup, but they don't tell me where exactly everything's going. They say generally it's going to be all expenses. People have to put, again, investors aren't spring chickens. They're going to put on their glasses to read this. They can't get it. And they're also saying at the end of the day, which is just intuitively telling me they're trying to justify this and saying having a commitment of we will need this much capital to execute this effectively. They're saying, well, at the end of the day, we're going to be doing this. So this is not a very effective ask slide for me, right? This is okay. There's a problem with this slide. I'll get into it in a second, but what we see right now is we see very clearly they're asking for $275K, and they have it broken down where 245 for salaries, 20 for marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Not bad. They don't have any deal terms in here necessarily, so we don't know if what the terms are. If this was to an investor-only group, they're going to ask what the terms are. But one key thing I want to show you guys is they want 245, which is like 80–90% of their full ask for salaries. For seed pre-seed stage companies, having full salaries is investors get very wary. You as a founder should be willing and understand that an early stage company, you are going to be putting in a lot more time for low pay, or you have had savings or other funds to help coach you through this time. The funds that are being raised are for growing the company. So if you have 245, which is almost all of your ask for salaries, not saying it's right out the gate bad, but you need to be prepared to defend where that money's going and whose salaries that money's going to. Okay. And of course, inevitably, a couple of you will probably have questions on that, which we can address at the Q&A as well. This is just not great. They request $300K for StartUpNV to sell this device in Nevada and the other 49 other states. Well, first of all, I would hope that it's assumed you're going to go you're going to go the rest of the United States and hopefully globally. That's implied. You don't have to include that you're going to all 49 other states. Would have been really funny if they said all of 50 states. That would have been something in fire. But I don't need to necessarily know it's implied. But also, they wasted more than half of this slide with an image that's only ancillary. It might not even be totally related to their concept, but they could have used this to break down deal terms if it's all investors, or at least asset allocation. Where are they spending the money? You know, this is crowded, and it's just not very effective at telling me, okay, they want 300K for what? So this one's okay. There's a couple key problems with this. We see really quickly they want 500K for 12% equity or preferred stock. Great, they got the amount, they got the deal terms, that's great. But you guys look at this chart, I have to squint to see what this legend is, and there's no numbers on this. I can probably assume if I squint, there's maybe 40, 30% for staffing, but I don't know for sure. So this is a mess. This use of funds needs to be redone because I can't just guess where exactly this money is going. I want to see some numbers, and also I want the legend to be larger so I can know I don't have to squint to see it again. Big fonts, clear, straight line. Exit strategy. Again, this is not terrible. You can include it. You can have the exit strategy, but exit strategy is something that, well, you should be absolutely knowledgeable on. You should be thinking about how you are exiting and who to, and what the acquisition and exit activity is in your sector. You can talk about that. You don't necessarily need to include it in this initial pitch. You can include it in a reference slide. You can talk about it absolutely, but it might just crowd up your ask slide. You're going to get asked about that eventually, but you may not need to include that in your ask slide itself. Redone. We redid this slide. Again, very clear at the top. 500K for 12% equity. Awesome. All right, the amount and the deal terms. Also, we see a clear breakdown with percentages of where this money is going to. Perfect. It was great. That's all I need to know. If I have questions as an investor, I'll ask questions, but I have the gist right here. So this is a good example of a good deck, or sorry, good slide on this. This is an example of, it has its key components, but it's just a little crowded. So we see at the top, okay, they're raising 600,000, great. But they have all these ancillary bullets so that we know that we marketing, sales, okay, they got 70%, content creation and technology, they want 30%, but there's a lot of these ancillary bullets and they have exit strategy here at the bottom. They're just not necessary. You know, I had to swim through it a little bit to get this what they need. Again, streamline it. But also at the bottom, I'll call your attention, their exit strategy. Series A round, spring 2011. That's not an exit. That's just another raise. So that's off the bat. I don't need to know that about your A round. You can talk about that, and that'll absolutely be in your deep dive meeting probably, or your next meeting you get. But it's not part of your exit strategy. Your A round is not part of your exit strategy. Your exit strategy is when you exit ownership of the company, and that's down the line. Again, you can talk about that. You don't necessarily need to include that in the ask slide itself. We rework this. Okay? Target 600K, 400 committed. If you guys have money that's soft circled, that's powerful. If you have money that has been committed by other investors, and you have permission for those investors to say so, absolutely say that you have said money committed. All right? It's powerful. Please include that. Use of funds, really simply broken down, 70% to marketing and sales, 30% to technology development. Great. And they have exit strategy as a label down here, a sensor here, but now this opens them up to talk about it. Where do we see ourselves in 3 to 5 years? To whom do we see ourselves exiting to? Or do we think this will go to IPO? What have you? All right? Don't need to bog this down. It'll be simple. Again, if they are reading, they're not listening. This is for a pitch deck, not a deliverable deck. Then, of course, you're going to have your final slide, which will be your thankful. Put your company logo on it. Put your company contact on it. So if I want to get a hold of you later, I can email you, call you up. If I have your deck, I see your information, I'm going to call you up. A thank you, obviously. And you can, at this point, repeat your ask if you'd like to. You can end the slide and do your Q&A kind of on the area where you say, hey, this is where our goal of this pitch was, is to get to the next meeting to talk about us raising this amount of capital for this thing, these things, all right? So a little bit more on style. We already touched base on a few of these. Large, simple fonts, right? We don't want anything acrylic or bouncy. You want to keep this straightforward. Don't do anything that's cursive. Particularly, we tend to see consumer-based product startups. They tend to have a really stylized wording. even if it's part of your branding, make it simple, make it straightforward for the investors, right? So I can read it easily. Minimal background elements of the slides. It is excellent and encouraged that you should have some stylistic or branding component for your pitch deck. Do not overdo it. Do not make it so confounded by branding and colors and whimsical components to the deck that it's hard to follow and it's just distracting, okay? So keep the background elements minimalized, efficient, clean. Logo on each slide. This is a branding opportunity. See how we have StartUpNV up here at the corner on every slide? You should be putting your slide, your logo on each of your slides, whether it's small or somewhere, or it's watermarked in the back, what have you. We have seen decks that they go through the entire deck without us seeing the logo until it's like the very end of the ask. That's not effective. The entire time, like, okay, what's this company's name again? So your front and center intro slide should be, we are this company name, big fat logo there on the front, all right? And then you should have your repeating logo on every other slide, right? No animations. You can have simple animations, similar to what I've had in this presentation. I've had a few interspersed here that were really simple, okay? If you start to get too complex, that's pitch decks 202 or 102, right? It's just a little bit more down the line. For your first pitch deck, your initial meetings, it's better that it's effective and it works and it's clean than it is bouncy and having a lot of interjecting parts, right? To use page numbers, make them small. Page numbers are still valuable. Many investors will use them. What they'll do is they will write down notes and put a page number or slide number attached to it. So they can ask you, hey, go back to the slide, I have questions on this. Right? So they're still valuable to include, but don't have them occupy too much space. Have them small, so you can use more space for the topic itself, right? No video. It's highly recommended you do not use a video in your first pitch deck. There's a number of reasons why, and we discussed them earlier on, is one, they tend to malfunction when you want them not to. And then they also can take up 30 seconds to a minute of your pitch where it could have been spent, or even 3 minutes I've seen of a 10-minute pitch. That's a third of your time knocked out by a video where it would have been more effective for you to go into it yourself and more genuine from an investor standpoint for you to go into yourself. So be careful with videos, particularly if they're just ancillary and not related to your product at all. One idea per slide. Don't try to mush too many things together, okay? Streamlined, effective. Very simple charts if you're using them. I said back when we see a traction slide, we want to see a chart. We don't want to see a financial statement. I want to see a TAM SAM SOM chart. I don't want to see an entire breakdown of your marketing calculations. So keep it real simple, all right? Photos. Photos are effective. They are. They absolutely can. They convey a lot of nuance and a lot of things with the imagery component. But if your deck is structured such that it's heavily reliant on photos, too many photos, it's lost what you're exactly doing. There's too much going on. Keep it to less than 2 photos per slide to convey a concept, okay? And never ever have your entire deck be just photos with no other structure, right? Because I need to be able to follow somewhat. Again, this is support structure for your pitch. It shouldn't be a standalone, nor should you be a standalone pitching of it, okay? That's everything I have for you guys now. Again, my name is Logan Brown with StartUpNV. Very excited to be with this team and provide you guys with the education on capital raising 101. And we'll go into questions now. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Logan.
Absolutely. Do you have any comments before we start? We probably start with a few questions here in the room and then 2 questions online. But do you have any initial feedback or any points that I may have missed before we get into that?
Well, Logan, I would say that I was actually distracted by your transitions from one slide to the other because they were slow. And it was hard to understand, like, why would it be so slow? So that's why I say no animations at all, because...
So one thing I noticed, and you're actually right, is it transitioned quickly on this screen, but on the presenting screen, for whatever, I noticed this screen would transition really quickly, but this is my home screen. This is what I'm presenting on. But when I'm looking at the other Zoom screen that's tuned in on this other computer here, it transitioned much slower. So I don't. Point being is the transition should always be real crisp, and by God, test it if you can before you go in. Yeah, good point, Maggie.
Yeah. And so far, you've gotten 2 great jobs, and I would add a great job. I think you did a really good job. I would ask one question though. Traction and projections. So if you have revenue, you have traction. If you're making a projection, you should label it that way and never call it traction, because it's just a fantasy until you have, boots on the ground and you're actually selling stuff. So should you always include a projection slide?
Honestly, no. I think that this is my opinion, Maggie. I'm sure you've seen many more pitch decks than I have. Projection slides can be valuable. What in the general term is that investors know that your projections are likely going to be wrong, but they want to see that you have been thinking about it and thinking hard about it, because it lends relevance to things about your business model and also your market, your TAM SOM. They're semi-related. Projections are if you have revenue currently and you can extrapolate from that, sure.
Yeah, but SOM is really your projection. So in your market slide where you have TAM, SAM, and SOM, you are using that SOM number as a projection. And before you would share the detail on a 2 or 3 year projection, you would be more advanced than this first pitch to investors. It would be further down the road.
Absolutely. Once you've started transacting in the market and you raise capital and you can extrapolate from that data, that's when I've seen those. But again, to Maggie's or to the point is even down the line when you start to have projections, not a financial model, not a financial document. You should have, it'll be more complex than a traction slide, but you should be showing pretty streamlined information. So keep that in mind for Pitch Decks 102.
So why don't you go to questions in your room there?
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions in the room right now? Yes, sir. Two questions.
When you have a wrap up, a lot of stuff across the top, a lot of stuff down vertical, you got 1 minute. How do you approach that?
Okay. So the gentleman's question.
Obviously, the way it's filled in speaks to it.
Right.
How much do you need to defend and explain what's in the vertical column, what's in the horizontal?
Absolutely. So the gentleman in the room asked a question of when you have less than a minute to talk about competitive matrix and you create a competitive matrix with the competitors at the top, competitive points on the side on the y-axis, how much do you need to be prepared to explain that, but also how much should you include in that, because you're going to be quickly going over it. A couple of things. One, the reason why we have a competitive matrix is to keep it clear so that I can, within 30 seconds while you're talking as well, I can absorb what you're talking, but I can also quickly kind of see what you're doing is effective. And as you go through it, you should be saying, at this point, we are competitive. At this point, we are competitive. At this point, we're competitive. And these are our competitors. You don't just say, here it is. You can walk through the slide itself to some extent. But also, again, when you get to the Q&A component, there will be, you may go back to competitors often. You'll go back to your competitors, and now you'll have a clean, clear reference when you're talking about your competitors in the Q&A component. What I would say is that when you make a competitive matrix, they're effective, but don't overdo it. If you get more than, and even the example we had was probably as many as you want to have. If you have more than 4 or 5 major competitors, maybe 6, you tend to bog down the slide. Or if you have comparables, if you have like 7 or 8 comparables, variables that you're comparing, that gets too bogged down. What are the core key things that you're doing differently that make you effective and competitive? If you can have 3 to 5, best, right? But I think that comes down to streamlining your main competitors and your main variables. Don't have too many, because then it does become way too crowded. And the second part, yes.
Are non-founder salaries considered acceptable? When you're growing a company that is, say, mostly a service company that is mostly people. So in other words, if there's an ask, a lot of it being going to salary, but they're all going to do hires. That is acceptable compared to $200,000.
It does depend. So this gentleman's question was, when you are a founder and you're doing a services company where majority of the majority of the raise is going to salaries, is that acceptable? Is that okay? The answer is, and Maggie and Jeff can definitely tune in on this as well. It depends. If you are raising capital to hire additional developers, for example, to develop a product, or salespeople to get the product to market, to go, especially if you're an enterprise, if you have an enterprise solution of some nature, then yeah, absolutely, you can have those dollars being going to those salaries. The salaries in question are the founders' salaries, and those are where it's harder to justify early on allocating, going wages for the role. It's a tough life. No one's going to lie to you here. It's not here, especially being an entrepreneur, a founder is a tough life, and that's the sacrifice component that you have to be ready for and be prepared for when you go into it. Maggie, Jeff, do you guys have anything to add to that point? I think we've addressed it a couple other sessions as well, but if you guys have anything to add to that point, please. All right. All righty, Maggie. Do you have any, I'm not monitoring the chat. I'm sorry, I have to lean in here to look at the chat, but do we have any questions from the crowd or from the online crowd?
So there was kind of a private question asking about terms for the ask. And so if, are the terms explained on the ask sheet or the ask slide?
Yeah, so here's the thing about terms is depending on which investor and what stage that, if they're your first potential investor, if they're going to be a lead investor, your terms will have some negotiation component attached to them at the next meeting. Again, pitch to get to the next meeting. If you go down the line, the investor group wants to make that investment, there's going to be some component of negotiation. Usually there's going to be some discussion on that. But when you list the terms that you're going with or that you're currently raising with, as long as your group is accredited investors, you can, yes, absolutely, you should include those terms or the terms that you're requesting or asking for in that ask slide. Because those will definitely come up. If you're pitching to investors and you don't include the terms, they're going to ask about the terms. If you're pitching to a mixed crowd or a group of non-investors, like you're just, you're pitching to a community or potential customers, whoever, you may not even have to have the ask. And if you do, you do not have to have the terms. But if it's credit investors, if you're pitching to get funding, yeah, absolutely, include the terms. Then Maggie, is there another question from the online group?
I am not seeing anything else. You must have done a fabulous job with the pitch deck.
Well, we have, again, Jeff addressed it earlier on. We've seen the better part of 700-800 pitches. Yes, I have a question here from Rosie.
So I came out of retirement to do what I'm doing, but we're to have strategic partnerships that we're entering into. So we aren't particularly out of the product for about the MVP, but we are strategically poised with them, and we're bringing awareness and to bring more collaboration because we have the land, we have the technology, we put together a package. So how do we write a pitch deck that is kind of a collaborative effort between strategic partners when I'm not selling a widget? But what I'm selling is a concept that is done most of the heavy lifting. And we're just looking for collaborators to bring awareness to the public so that we get public support, therefore a little pressure to our leaders to start thinking of solutions that are for the greater common good.
Gotcha. So Rosalie's question was, if they don't have a widget or a product per se, and they're trying to raise capital, what they do is they are they're the leading front of consortium of property developers. you said, right?
Yeah, problem solvers.
And problem solvers in their sector. How do they raise, how do they structure a pitch deck for that concept? First of all, if you don't need to raise capital, then don't raise capital. But when you're doing that, same thing. What is that key market opportunity that you are trying to, or market opportunity or problem point you're trying to solve? And then how does your value add, whether that could be a network effect of some nature. So if you are the frontward facing body of a consortium of companies that are strategic partners, then that sure as hell better be your value add, and you sure better say why you are vital to that. Or else me as an investor, I'm going to say to you, well, why isn't some other group doing what you're doing with this group? Why can't some other group be the consortium facing, the frontward facing component? So as long as you can justify and extend that competitive edge, like why are you the solution, or why your solution is the solution, same thing. If it's a little bit harder when you have something that's a little bit more intangible like that, when you're saying that your worth as a company is your strategic smarts and the strategic relationships you have with these various members. There we go. If they're exclusive, then that's going to be your competitive edge, and that's going to be your value add. Again, you need to demonstrate to investors how is it, if who are your competitors and why it's competitive, but also how that value add is worth consumers' money. Where the dollars going to come from, essentially, as well. It's easier with a product or a service company because you can say, here's problem, here's solution, here's how we're going to sell it for X amount of dollars. Versus yours probably has a more flexible and probably more complex business model, because there's various ways that you might go to monetizing that. But as long as you're clear and you're effective and you can demonstrate what your competitive edge is, what the value add is, and that there's a consumer base that will purchase those services from you, then that's how you go about it. Anyone else?
Logan, we do have a question that came in, and it's from Adrian. He asks, will your team look poorly if none of your co-founders or team members have any experience with a high-profile company?
No. Oh, sorry, you're saying?
And then the follow-on is just like, how do you work around that?
So, not necessarily. You do want to talk about the competitive edges and experiences that your team has. At the end of the day, every founder starts off pretty inexperienced, sometimes not in sectors of known. And it is much stronger vantage point to be from an experienced perspective, particularly if you were maybe a IT tech or a sales tech, an IT individual or a sales individual that was pretty high up in a company in your sector that you're focusing on, and then your startup solves a problem in the sector that you are working with. That's really compelling. It's not lost on investors, but it's not a sink the ship if you are a founder that's going into something that you have, that's not necessarily your sector. What I will say is that investors are going to look for commitment. They want to see that this is something that you are interested in solving, that it's not just this ancillary, I kind of came across this and, I'm working on it. They want to see that you have some gumption in, practically applying your skill set and the skill set of your team members to solve that problem and make a solution with it and take it to market. What you will have to do, particularly if you convince them to go into the next meeting and consider you guys for investment, is demonstrate that you covered your bases. Typically what that means, if you're a business founder, you find this problem in the market or this opportunity in the market, you say, okay, I'm going to go solve this. This is a great opportunity. You start to solve it and you don't have the technical expertise to do so. You sure hell better make your team members have technical expertise to cover some of that. And as you build your team, that you guys cover those areas as best you can. And I'll end that with saying, like, it is valuable for your team members to have experience in those sectors. It's highly valuable, but it won't sink the endeavor as long as you can convince the investors that you guys have the ancillary skill set and the gumption and the coachability to start to execute and solve problems, to execute the business venture. Maggie, that's a really long-winded way. If you have to answer that question, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, what I would add to that is if you're able to tell your story and make it a compelling story about why you have passion for solving this problem, that passion will go a long way with investors. If you don't have a product yet, angels are investing in the founders and the belief in the product and the belief that the founders have that they are going to do whatever it takes to make that successful. Now, of course, we all know that 14 out of 20 times they're going to be completely wrong, but it's the passion that you carry with you when you're making your pitch that's really going to make an impact on the investors. Jeff, do you have anything else to add? Jeff doesn't feel like talking tonight.
Is there some-
Well, I was trying to find my my mute button behind another window. No, the early stage investors are 95% investing in the founders, because a good group of founders can take whatever their idea is and make it work, because whatever you're starting with, chances are you're going to pivot it 2 or 3 times before you start to find product market fit and traction. So everybody, any mature investor, any experienced investor is going to know that. So they're looking at you as the founder, the passion that you have, the experience that you have, what's driving you. Having experience at a successful startup or having exited successfully is an awesome plus. But 85-90% of all the people pitching are first-time founders. So even if you have worked at Apple or Google or some other place, that's awesome, but that's a different kind of environment than a startup is. So don't feel bad that you don't have that experience, and show your passion, show your belief, show your commitment, because that's what the investors are looking for to carry their investment forward.
Maggie, thanks, Jeff. Maggie, do we have another question? We'll do one more question. We'll do another question from here, and then we'll move to one in the room. Is there another question from the online crowd?
No, I don't see one online.
All right, we got it.
So what's a good way, if you're a single founder and you're raising the initial capital so that you can hire, say, 3 professionals to, help you run the company. But at this point, you didn't need co-founders.
Did you
to
not?
build the software,
But you don't need you haven't thought about taking on a co. Are you asking if you take on a co-founder, or what the next step would be to get your next?
Well, I'm saying, I know ideally people like ventures that have 2 or 3 founders. I'm saying if you have one and you don't have 2 and 3, can you make the case that explain, the money is so that you can bring on an engineer, bring on a salesperson, and bring on an operations person.
So to those attending online, Joe's question was that if you're a solo founder and you're not necessarily interested in bringing on a quote unquote co-founder or full co-founder, but you're now starting to raise capital, you're going to want to bring on your next 2 to 3 hires. How do you get those professional hires? A couple of things on that, and then of course Maggie and Jeff probably has feedback on this as well. Is one, if you're bringing on really early hires, you're still going to have to give up some equity component. They might not be a co-founder in general, but it's hard to draw your first several professional hires with just straight monetary compensation. So you'll have to keep that in mind, that you're still going to probably have some sort. You're going to have some options and some equity investment for those founders. But the vast majority of people we see coming in with eventually getting some sort of co-founder to help them launch the venture. If you're not going to, I think that investors it wouldn't be a turn off in general, but they would be wary to watch your skill set and monitor your skill set, make sure you're covering those things, and make sure that you can cover where you're lacking if you're not going to bring on a co-founder.
Well, the issue is connecting money, because I would bring on a salesperson.
But typically a co-founder is going to be someone who's buying into the vision. They're going to be like you. They're not taking that full salary that first year. They're going to be buying into the vision for exchange of equity. If you don't want to give up that full buy-in, you can
bonus for their performance.
Yeah, maybe. Maggie or Jeff, do you guys have any feedback? Like for a solo entrepreneur who doesn't necessarily want to bring on a full co-founder, how do investors look at that? If they're making the correct hires or will be making the correct hires to cover their professional role basis, what do investors typically think about on that end if they see, or do they care?
There is a group of investors who will not invest in a solopreneur company. They just won't do it.
And that is despite the scientific research now done. If you want to pick it up and look at it, there's a book out there called Super Founders, where the author went through a group of, I think it was like 60 random companies versus 60 unicorns, and said, is this myth of having a 2-founder team, one is a business person, one is a technical person, does that give you a better chance of being successful versus a single founder versus 3 founders versus 2 technical founders and a bunch of other combinations? The scientific truth is there is no distinguishing between those groups. However, there's still a lot of bias toward founders in pairs that are partnered up, some business and technical. So there's that bias that's out there that you just have to recognize. Second, investors expect you to hire people. The tough part is if you haven't gone to market yet, if you haven't created a product and sold it and demonstrated some minimal proof of life, it's harder to raise money, especially if you're saying, well, I'm going to build this product and I have to hire engineers to build it. Well, how do you know that there's a market for it? Who have you talked to? How have you tested it? So it really depends on the kinds of people you're hiring and for what reason. If you've demonstrated some fit and some success in the market, even if it's through beta and you maybe aren't charging people for it, and you need to hire people to grow, that's a really good reason to raise money. And as long as it's not perceived that you're hiring people to effectively become a manager rather than a doer. As a startup entrepreneur, as the founder, you're expected to be a doer, even in areas that you might not be a big expert in. While you're grinding it out and doing your, earning your sweat equity and creating this vision, there is going to be a bias toward having you and the founding team do most of the initial work, at least until you've got something in the market. Harder to do with an actual physical product, but that's the bias that's out there in the market.
The venture has pain points already. So
yeah, Joe, in summation, there's a bias in the market for you raising capital. There's going to be a bias against you for not having a technical, for not having a co-founder. But as far as execution long term, it's going to be up to you and what you can demonstrate with the product, and also can you get the right butts and seats, essentially. Maggie, are there any questions that have come up from the chat?
Yeah, I have one more comment though on that. If you have a technical product and you don't have a technical co-founder, somebody who can iterate that product on a dime, somebody who is dedicated to sitting on the shoulders of the customers and finding out what they want and then giving it to them, then you're going to hurt for a long time.
Yes.
And you may not be successful. Here is a question from the chat. In order for us to determine if we should include terms on the ask slide, will we have an opportunity to know a little more about each of the potential investors? If you're pitching in a competition, you can certainly ask the organizers of the competition if you have 100% accredited investors, and then you can put terms on your slide. If you're just pitching in a situation where you don't know exactly what's going on, you're better off, you're safer if you don't put valuation and terms in there. So the answer is sometimes you will know and sometimes you won't know.
And Maggie, what about for startup? And like if they were going to pitch the accelerator, I's actually submitted to the app, is submitting an application. So I think you're pitching to StartUpNV.
Yeah, so for StartUpNV, for the FundNV, you'll be pitching to people that we invited as accredited investors. For AngelNV, everybody who's a member of the AngelNV investment group is an accredited investor. They have to be in order to be in the group.
And another question from the room.
On that question, on setting up your problem, that you have the large problem, and then you're showing with the, okay, here's the large problem. I would say this is dysfunctional division that we have going, and yet we have these solutions that we collaborate together to solve them. Would you list both of those problems, and then the solution is, and here's an example of a collaboration that we're doing that we actually can have done and completed. It's not that it's beyond conceptual. Do you list both of them, or do you only list what you've done and not list the biggest problem?
So are you asking if in your problem you listed, let's say, for example, two major problems that are tangent?
Yeah, one's
But-
a general, and then one's to show the specific how we fix that general problem.
Gotcha. And then your solution one is, and you have a solution one is concrete and one is a little bit more conceptual.
That's right.
You can, that's fine. When you structure a problem solution combo, basically you want to kind of attach them one to one. You don't want to have one of the things that will just irk investors is if you have problems that are not addressed by your solutions. That we just see that way too often too. They're only ancillarily related. They're not being solved. Problem A is not being solved by solution B, or vice versa. Or the four problems here are not being solved by the four solution points here. If you have, so that's something you should totally, absolutely match your problem points to your solution points or to your product points, whatever that might be. The answer you're talking about having more of a conceptual problem and solution versus a tangential problem solution. Focus on what your solution is going to be providing, what you're going to be charging in the business model. And I'm trying to think of a good example. We had
So let me just put it quick. So is that I have a problem that I can actually demonstrate how the solution has been manifested in real life, and so I can show that the business model actually works.
Oh, are you
By
saying?
giving an example and saying how a veterans,
Yeah, so
biggest veterans affordable housing is what it is, and we can show it, and it actually solves that first problem.
yep. So you can do that. Like I said, every deck's going to be a little bit different. And if you can have something that, again, is streamlined and easy and effective that can back that up, sure. For those who are attending online, may not have heard, if you have your problem and your solution and they're high level, they're what you're doing, but you can provide kind of a quick example of like how that's executed in real life. You can do that. Again, you don't bog down the story. That can be part of the telling the story component. Keep it to one slide, or even just keep it in your solution slide. You can also use that to reference that into like the index or later down the line to show you traction. Like here's an example of what, sorry, not traction, your milestones. Like here's what we've done. Here's a real world example. Again, that's fine. If you're going to include that, don't make it 3 slides developing this. It should be, here was the problem, here's the solution, here's a great executorial example of how we did this. Keep it 1 slide, simple, straightforward. And if you can quantify what went on in that, we had this much revenue from this, we solved this much point, there's this excess outcome, even better. Maggie, do you have any feedback on that?
I was actually having a hard time hearing her, so I'm not sure what the question is.
So she, would have a normal, normal flow of a deck. There's a problem or pain point, and then here's the solution, which are going to be high level. They're what the concept is, and then followed by another slide, which we say here's an example of a program or a outcome of said, that we did that kind of demonstrates what our problem solution combo is. And granted, she's not a product-based company. She's a services-based company, with probably a little bit more complex business model. If that will aid in the delivery of your concept, then that's okay to include it again. Clean, streamlined, does it advance the story quickly, efficiently? Right?
Yeah, if it's a proof of concept, then yeah, tell the story. I'm a little concerned that the problem and the solution are not quite clear enough. We want a problem that's easily relatable, a problem that doesn't take 5 slides to describe. We want a problem that's easily understandable in 1 slide, 2 at the most, and then the solution that addresses it. So we don't want to know about paper cut problems because investors won't invest in a paper cut solution because it's not going to bring in enough money. So it should be a big, hairy problem with a big, hairy solution.
Excellent, thanks, Patty. Do we have any questions that have come over on the chat?
No.
Right. Any other questions in the room? All right, well, everyone, thank you guys for tuning in. Next week, we will be, no, not next week. Oh goodness, I have to check my calendar. But we will actually be going for the next meetup will be on January 4th. We're going to be taking a break for the holidays. And January 4th, we will reconvene for Pitch Deck Deconstruction Day. Many of you have already tuned in for Pitch Deconstruction. Again, an emphasis on this, participation is highly encouraged. So if you want to pitch, come prepared with a 1-minute pitch. And it's much harder than you may think. And also come prepared with, if you feel like yours is good enough and you want to be prepared to have, you voted potentially to give a 3-minute pitch, come prepared with a few slides to give a 3-minute pitch. And those will be taken in on January 4th, which is a number of weeks. And this will be actually an online event. This will be all online. So those tuning in online in Reno and Las Vegas, be prepared to participate online for that. Additionally, the recording from this session, along with some additional resources, we'll hope to get you out to this before the end of the week. And then, of course, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Again, you guys can reach me at logan@startupnv.org. And thank you all for coming out. We appreciate your time, and I hope you took something beneficial from these sessions. See you all January 4th.
Great job, Logan. Thank you.
Good. Take care.
So long, everyone.